The Great Plains and Midwest are gearing up for some shaky weather this week. A multi-day severe weather threat of tornadoes, damaging winds, and hail are all set to unfold over the course of this Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. As always, we want you to stay weather aware throughout the course of these events. So without further ado, let's get right into today's video. Now starting off here, what we're going to want to focus on is this low pressure system developing over the Rocky Mountains there, right around Colorado or Wyoming. We see that move northeast towards Nebraska, through Iowa, and over into Illinois and Wisconsin. Now that's our first low. Now we want to focus on the second low that develops off the eastern Rockies in Colorado, moves through the same path that our last low took, but now you can see that creates more of the severe weather threat that's going to go through Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. Now when we talk about storm development, there are four main factors that we want to look into: temperature, dew point, energy, and wind shear. Now let's begin looking at these factors for day 4 or Thursday. Now starting off, we're going to look at our temperature. So here you can see so far we're looking at Thursday morning with the GFS forecast model, and you can start to see some of those temperatures increasing up in that warm sector, or that area of warm air advection that we associate with this low pressure system. Now what you'll see here is some of those upper 70s to lower 80s, some warmer conditions moving across portions of the Great Plains. That is going to fuel the severe weather events. So we see those warmer daytime heating conditions. We see a lot of that energy building low level. Now we're also going to look at our Canadian forecast model, which is the GDPS. Now, as you can see with the Canadian forecast model, we also see a similar story. So we see those upper 70s to lower 80s, very similar consistency. That's a good sign that we're already seeing some more accurate forecasting ahead, especially as we head into Thursday. Now, Thursday isn't too far out. This is recording on Monday, so we're not really looking at too much of a change so far. We're seeing some consistencies, and that's showing that we can trust this more and more as we head towards this event. Now, we're going to be using our GFS forecast model here. Now, moving on to our next factor, which is dew point. This is basically showing us kind of what our moisture situation is, what our storm development is going to look like. So basically right now we have moisture at the surface, or our dew point, and as you can see, look at how it kind of crawls up the Great Plains there. So that's what we associate, or what is known as warm air advection. Now advection is the fluid movement at the horizontal level, moving up the Great Plains there. You can see that basically that's all that warm air, all that storm fuel, warm moist air that's surging up into the Great Plains. Now that is going to be the big determining factor. We see some of those dew points in the 60s, and even towards the Gulf of Mexico, we see those more 70-degree dew points. Those are even higher and more favorable for storm development. Now, in our area of interest of storm development, we see dew points of around 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, in the Great Plains, that is definitely very good, and that's what we want to see for storm development, and that's something we have to watch as we progress closer to this event. Now, moving on to our Canadian forecast model, or our GDPS, we're seeing those consistencies once again, indicating that we are having a more trustworthy forecast as we head later into the week. So now you can see we're seeing those similar details. It almost looks exactly like the GFS forecast model run, and that's a good thing. So we see here those 70-degree dew points down towards the Gulf of Mexico. Then as all that warm air advection surges up into the Great Plains, we see those 60-degree dew points across portions of northern Texas, Oklahoma, and then even up into Kansas. That's all going to be favorable storm development material as we head into Thursday. Now moving on to our next aspect, which is energy. We're going to be looking at a factor called surface-based CAPE, or also known as convective available potential energy. Now all you really need to know is that this is our storm energy. This is what fuels our severe weather events, so to speak. So what we want to focus on is we want higher levels of CAPE, near the surface level is most ideal, and we want to see those higher levels. So take a look at how that surface-based CAPE, indicated by those yellows and reds, those are those higher levels that we want to see. Those start to surge up with that warm air advection, up from the Gulf of Mexico and into the Great Plains, into portions of the Texas Panhandle, Oklahoma, and Kansas. Now that's what we're going to see for severe weather development on Thursday. So we see those higher energy levels with the GFS, and that is going to be fueling our severe weather event. Now taking a look at our Canadian forecast model, we're looking at that same aspect, surface-based CAPE, and we also see a similar story again. Now the Canadian model tends to overdo the convective available potential energy levels just a bit. We do see more of those reds popping up around the Texas Panhandle and Oklahoma. Now I don't doubt that we won't have that much surface energy available on Thursday. However, I do believe that this might be overestimating it a little bit, and I want to take this with a grain of salt. Take this very cautiously and don't overestimate from the GDPS on these surface-based CAPE levels. Now the final factor that we're going to look at for Thursday is our wind shear. Now what is wind shear? Wind shear is the change in speed and direction of wind with height in the atmosphere. Now this is going to help our storms to maintain those updrafts and not so much get rained out and deplete themselves of their energy. So what we want to see here is we want to look for those higher levels of wind shear for good storm development. And you can see there, okay, so we see over Arizona, New Mexico, those levels of wind shear or bulk shear here we see from the surface to 500 millibar level. Now this moves into Texas and Oklahoma and even into parts of Kansas on our storm day or Thursday. So we are going to see this, and that's what we want for storm development, good storm development to manage those storms and keep those updrafts flowing healthy and strong. Now let's move on to day 5 or Friday. Now going over some of those same thermodynamics that we went over for Thursday, we're now going to be doing that for Friday. So we're going to start up here with our temperature, our surface temperature that is, and you can see here we're seeing a little bit of a different story for Friday. Okay, so I want you to focus on down near Texas. We see those 90-degree Fahrenheit temperatures start to peak up towards the mid to afternoon hours, and then even into the evenings, we see some of those warmer temperatures there heading up into Oklahoma and Kansas into those 80s, and then into the upper 70s the further we get towards Nebraska and Iowa. Now looking at our Canadian model here, we are also seeing a similar story, not so much as extreme as those 90s, but we do see more of those 80s across portions of Texas and into Oklahoma, and then we see that up into even in Kansas, and then more of those 70s as we move into portions of Nebraska and Iowa. So overall, some definitely warmer conditions expected for much of the Great Plains Friday. Now looking at our dew points once again with the GFS forecast model, now for Friday, we are seeing more of those 60s move up again, some left over from the day before. Now we are seeing much of those 60s even up into Nebraska, Iowa, over into Missouri, Arkansas, and then look at some of those 70-degree dew points indicated by the purple. Those are indicated there near Texarkana and east of the Dallas-Fort Worth area in Texas. So northeast Texas starting to get some of that deeper moisture, definitely going to be a concerning factor for storm development Friday. Now moving on to our Canadian forecast model, we're looking at those dew points once again. Now notice how the Canadian forecast model wants to pinpoint that little area of purple or that 70-degree dew point up there for southeastern Nebraska. And it also wants to suggest less of a 70-degree dew point range for northeastern Texas there. So that's something we do have to factor in. Both of these forecast models are not in agreement of where they want to place that deeper moisture. However, much of the area you can still see is indicated in those 60-degree Fahrenheit dew points, suggesting that we will have moisture available abroad. We just don't necessarily know where that deeper moisture may be quite yet. Now, revisiting the aspect of energy here, we're looking for Friday at our surface-based CAPE levels here for the Great Plains. Now you can see so far some higher levels of around 1,000 to 2,000 joules per kilogram there, which is really indicated by those oranges and yellows. Now what we see here, those spread up into portions of the central parts of those states such as Oklahoma, Kansas, and then the eastern Nebraska. Now those are all areas ahead of this cold front that's going to be moving through that really will be providing that energy necessary ahead of the lifting mechanism that is already going to be moving through, such as the dry line and the cold front, already amplifying the type of severe weather we are going to see. Now, looking at our Canadian forecast model here, we see some higher levels of CAPE indicated here. I would take what we're seeing with a grain of salt. Again, the Canadian tends to overdo this, but we want to visit both the GFS and the GDPS here to kind of get a diverse reading of what we can expect. But here you can see so far, a lot of those higher energy levels indicated there for southeastern Nebraska Friday, some areas up to 4,000 joules per kilogram. That is definitely a lot of surface-based CAPE to have in an area, and that would definitely ahead of a cold front and a dry line, that would be pretty significant and lead to some pretty significant severe weather impacts, such as damaging hail, winds, and even some tornadoes. Now, the main thing that I want to focus on is more south of that, where we see those consistencies and those 1,000 to 2,000 joules per kilogram of CAPE there, and that's more or less what I want to focus on, because we want to focus on those consistencies rather than the extremes. Now moving on to our final aspect for Friday, we're looking at that wind shear once again, that bulk shear from the surface to 500 millibars. And you can see here, we see a lot of that move into place for portions of Oklahoma, Kansas, and even up in Nebraska and northern Texas. All of these areas are going to have relatively good shear across the broad area, and that's going to create that wind change necessary to keep those strong and healthy updrafts. Now, some of the stronger shear could even lead to tornadogenesis, or the spawning of tornadoes, and that's another threat that we have to look out for as we progress into Friday. Now we're looking at the GDPS, or our Canadian forecast model, and the similar story here. You can see that wind shear moves into the area, same relative area again. Now this is pretty consistent, so the GDPS and the GFS somewhat agree on the wind shear, as you can see here, for either Thursday or Friday. And now, since we're looking at Friday, those consistencies are still there, indicating that we can really start to trust this and kind of lock in, even though this is still a week out. Now, what I do want to show you here is we have about those 40 to 50 knots of wind shear across portions of Oklahoma, up there towards the Texas Panhandle, and even into Kansas. That's where we want to focus on our most potential for some of those stronger storms to even some tornado genesis, or thus the forming of tornadoes. So we really want to watch that carefully. Again, all 3 of these days have the potential for large hail, damaging winds, and tornadoes. So keep that in mind. These are all higher risk days of severe weather that we really want to pay attention closely to. And you can see that here with the consistencies in both of these forecast models. Now we're moving on to our final severe weather threat day here, Saturday, or day 6. Now we're looking at our surface temperatures through the GFS for Saturday. And here so far, we start to see some pretty intense temperatures start to peak up through portions of the Texas Panhandle over there into western Oklahoma and western Kansas, and even up in Nebraska. We see a lot of those widespread 90-degree Fahrenheit temperatures, upper 80s, and of course those 70s as we move further north. Now, I want you to focus on that little dot of those colder temperatures. So we see those 60-degree Fahrenheit temperatures start to poke through Kansas. It's kind of a little hole in the middle of those really hot temperatures. Now, those are our storms starting to form. That's that downdraft, that's that cool, rainy air that's kind of taking away those temperatures. That's how significant the environment is to support these storms later in that day. So we're already seeing here those storm cells start to develop on the GFS forecast model that is already showing the type of unstable environment we are seeing. Even though this is very far out, this is Saturday this week. Now, we're looking at our Canadian forecast model here, and if you look here, not so much of an extreme here. We still do see that pocket of storms developing with that temperature. You can see those colder downdrafts indicated there by those colder temperatures as that circle in the middle of those warmer temperatures, but we don't see those 90-degree Fahrenheit temperatures that the GFS was forecasting. So again, this is where the consistencies start to come out even further. As we get to day 6, all the way far out, that's further. This is 7 days out, of course, this Saturday from the time I'm recording on Monday, April 22nd, 2024. But you can see here that we're already seeing these inconsistencies start to go out, so we really can't trust this. But the basic thing is to get an idea of what we can expect to see to start to become weather aware. So we already see that day 6 threat is out there, and we really want to focus on, okay, we have temperatures available. We don't really know what they're going to be, but we know around 70 to 80 degrees Fahrenheit, maybe even the potential for 90s. All right, now looking at those dew points here on the GFS, we see that final stage of that moisture setup here. Look at that warm air advection. Now it's moving northeast instead of straight north. This is due to that dry line pushing through. You can see the dry line setting up there. Now the dry line is the area between the blue and the brown. That's what we're looking at. Now that's that lifting mechanism as an addition to the cold front that will be coming through, but we also see that setting up through western Oklahoma, central Kansas, and over there in western Texas. So this is already pushing through. This is our final day on Saturday, and you can see how that moisture is setting up. We're looking at about 60 degree dew points, some of those upper 60s there, and a couple spotty areas of 70s still looking to linger there for northeastern Texas and eastern Oklahoma there, not out of the question according to the GFS. Now looking at our Canadian forecast model, once again, we're seeing consistencies with the GFS, surprisingly, on our 7-day way out on Saturday. You can already see those widespread 60s that we were talking about. Again, even some of those areas of upper 60s down there towards Oklahoma and Texas. But we also see some more spotty locations of 70s. Again, I would take that with a grain of salt because of how widespread that is down there. But we do see those widespread 70 degree Fahrenheit dew points for much of northeastern Texas and southern Oklahoma and southwestern Arkansas. So again, a lot of moisture available for these storms to use. And when that dry line and that cold front come through, that's only going to amplify what we already have available for a lifting mechanism. And if we get some good shear through there, that will definitely create a pretty significant severe weather event that we will have to monitor. All right, now for Saturday, we're looking at our energy here, or our surface-based CAPE, with the GFS forecast model, and look at that widespread coverage of those oranges and reds. So that is looking up to about 2,000 to 3,000 joules per kilogram. Even some areas looking to peak up towards those closer 3,500 joules per kilogram levels. So that's higher level CAPE, definitely a more dangerous scenario if this were to unfold, because we have widespread instability at the surface, indicating that we don't have much in the way of stopping these storms from developing. And then ahead of that dry line and that cold front, that only increases that threat, because we already have a lifting mechanism to break any convective inhibition or capping that would keep that from happening. Now notice again how this surges up into parts of Iowa, Illinois, and even into Wisconsin. The majority of the Great Plains and even into the Midwest are looking at this potential Saturday for a severe weather threat. Now, looking at our Canadian forecast model, once again, we do see a lot of that widespread, very high convective available potential energy there. We see anywhere from 3,000 to 4,000 joules per kilogram. Notice how those pinks are centered around northern Texas and southern Oklahoma. That's going to be a very iffy factor, simply because, again, we talk about how the Canadian likes to overdo that energy, and you may be wondering, well, why are you even using this? Well, it's important to look at this from all angles, because the Canadian forecast model is not wrong every time, okay, when it comes to the energy factor, and we want to take that into consideration. We want all possible angles when we're looking at that. Now, I could go out and show you every forecast model there is to know. We wouldn't have time to do that, so I like to pick the select few that I think are the best and the ones that I have access to, and these are pretty much the two, the GFS and the Canadian, that I want to kind of demonstrate to you to get an idea of what we can expect to see. So looking there on the Canadian, you can see, look at how those storms, okay, those holes there start to pop up in that energy area. Those are those storms forming. Notice how that's anywhere from Oklahoma to Kansas. Those storms eat that up, provide all that convective inhibition, so that just further amplifies the type of situation that we could potentially be dealing with Saturday, as we have all this energy available and as we head into that factor with the dry line and the cold front. All right, now the final factor we're going to look at for Saturday's setup is the wind shear. We're looking at this currently through the GFS, and look at some of those 50 to 60 knot wind shear profiles that pop up there. So right over Oklahoma in the eastern Texas panhandle, all those areas are likely going to have, if this goes through as follows, which it likely won't because we do have a lot of variability in time between this forecast and the event. However, if this were to occur, that would lead to an increased risk for tornado genesis, definitely some higher shear profiles, and with that strong convective available potential energy, this would likely make this one of the strongest days out of the three. Simply because we have the higher energy, we have that final moving cold front coming through, and the dry line, and we have all of these major factors coming together to create this very unstable scenario that would likely create very impactful severe weather events, such as damaging hail, tornadoes, and damaging winds. Now finally, we're going to look at the GDPS, or Canadian forecast model, and what it's saying for the wind shear here. Now, if you look here, this is also suggesting that 50 to 60 knot wind shear area across portions of Oklahoma and Kansas, and even in the portions of northwestern Texas. Now, all these areas are going to have equal potential for tornado genesis if this were to verify, so we definitely need to keep an eye on this as this progresses. Now, I do want to mention that this is still just under a week out. This is Saturday, so keep in mind that a lot can still change between then, and the further we get out into the forecast, we definitely want to be a little more cautious with what we're looking at, because not everything can be taken very seriously. As always, I want to thank you all so much for watching today's forecast. A big thanks to today's sources, Pivotal Weather, where all the forecast models seen in today's video came from, and the National Weather Service Storm Prediction Center, where all those outlooks, the day 4, the day 5, and the day 6 outlooks came from. A big thanks to our channel member, Chris Betty at the Hurricane tier. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. I would ask you to consider subscribing to Morio's forecast free of charge, and I would ask you to consider following the Weather Atlantis official Facebook page for more inside information and complimentary personal forecasts when you message me on my Facebook page. Again, I want to thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.